Okay, I would like to move item number 8, the financial report for 6 months ending December 31st, up into the next position unless there's any objection from the council. All right, seeing none, I'll move this up to this point. Robin, you get to be first off the block here. This is actually a continuation from our last agenda, so. And none of the masses came back.
Good evening. Tonight I will be providing you with a high-level overview, starting with the city's general fund for the first 6 months of the current fiscal year 14-15, followed up with the city's utility funds, and then that will be followed by an overview of what's coming next in anticipation of the city's budget for fiscal year 15-16. The staff is currently in process developing. This is a summary of the general fund budget versus actual at the highest level, including the beginning fund balance as of July 1st, 2014. Total revenues, total expenditures, and fund balance on a budget basis for the first 6 months of the fiscal year. The fund balance amount includes only the uncommitted amount. This does not include the city's Economic Stabilization Reserve Fund. It's the ESR that sustains us through our deficits. This fund balance here, the $4,325,000, is the city's uncommitted audited fund balance, and that's what helps us tide our general fund over until we start getting our revenues in. You'll see revenues in just a minute being very, very low at the beginning of the fiscal year. Our outflow is significantly higher the first 6 months of the year than our inflow from property taxes and sales tax, which is what drives that negative $4,087,000 fund balance as of December 31st. The year-to-date amounts are shown on a cash basis and represent the actual amounts that the city has received for revenues through December 31st. The original fiscal year 14-15 budgeted expenses were $36.3 million. To that, we added grant-funded appropriations of $893,000. If those aren't spent during the year, they're carried over to the following fiscal year unless the grant terms have expired and we're unable to carry them over. But grants carry over from year to year, along with purchase order commitments of $250,000. Negotiation contract cost increases totaling $518,000. That's all of the bargaining units that we had settled with as of December 31st. And then other items which totaled $34,000. The total currently budgeted expenditures are just over $38 million. Since revenues are on a cash basis and largest revenues aren't received until February and May of each year, you'll see that our fund balance is always deficit as of December. This year we were slightly better off than we were last year in December because I compared the two numbers. Not by much, but by a little bit. And these slides show your revenues, your major 4 revenues for the general fund. The blue bar represents the amount of budgeted amount, and the gold bar is the percentage of the budget received. So for sales tax, we've received over 25% of it, which seems a little low for December 31st financial report, but that's the typical cash flow pattern of sales tax. And we anticipate for that and plan for it. So that doesn't concern me. By the end of the year, finance projects that property tax revenues will be approximately $225,000 higher than the amount budgeted because our assessed values came in at 6.2% increase and we only budgeted for a 4% increase. I believe my financial report that was in the agenda packet said a 3%, which is what we include in our long-term fiscal model. We planned for a 3% increase, but we actually budgeted for a 4% increase in fiscal year 14-15 because we expected that it would do better. So I correct that, and it's actually a 4% that we budgeted, but we still beat that by 2.2%, and that's what I anticipate will generate the additional $225,000 in receipts to the city prior to the end of the fiscal year. This is 14 quarters of sales tax data on both a cash basis and an adjusted basis. The good news is that we've only had 2 negative quarters on a cash basis and only 1 on an adjusted basis, very small data. I just got in the Christmas quarter data late this afternoon, looked at it briefly before heading to the last meeting, and it's also positive data for us. So we don't know what it looks like on an adjusted basis till after we get our audit data, but good news for us. Things are lining up as we had hoped. You can see, though, from looking at it, it's very volatile and very difficult to predict over time. You look at the cash basis, which is what we have available to pay our employees and our vendors with. It's kind of been all over the place. Eventually, the adjusted basis catches up with the cash basis and we get our money. If there's a misallocation or a mispayment, it just takes time. But it's definitely difficult to predict. We've budgeted for a 3.5% increase in sales tax, and we've achieved that thus far in the fiscal year.
Robin, could you explain for the public what the difference between cash basis and adjusted basis is?
The adjusted basis is what our auditors tell us that our total gross receipts were, and when they take out any double up payments if somebody paid late for last quarter and the cash receipts are actually combined with this quarter, or if a payment was missed. There's always misallocations where we receive somebody else's allocation. It should have went to them and it came to us. So Board of Equalization will ultimately true that up and make it right. So we always look at the adjusted data as well as the cash data. On the expenditure side, we've spent 46.8% of our salaries and benefits. You would think that we would be at 50% as of December 31st. I went ahead and compared that to last year just out of curiosity because we had some pretty significant savings at the end of last fiscal year due to vacant positions throughout the city. Last year at the same time, we had only spent 44% of the amount budgeted. So what I'm seeing is we're spending more this year, which tells me that we're either filling vacancies faster through the recruitment process or we're using overtime to fill vacant shifts. In the case of public safety, we have constant staffing models and we cover shifts with the appropriate number of personnel through overtime if somebody's off on sick leave or vacation. 42% of amounts budgeted for operating expenses have been expended halfway through the fiscal year. And the total general fund expenditures are 45% of the amount budgeted, which is fairly typical at this time of year. As far as how much we expect to see at the end of the fiscal year, it's difficult to say with the vacancies we have throughout the city at this point in time. Department heads will be turning in their budgets on April 6th, and with that, they provide to finance their estimated total expenditures for the fiscal year end. They project forward because they know what their vacancies are and how soon they plan to fill those vacancies more than what finance could ever know. We help them with those projections if they need them, but once those submissions are all made, finance will gather all the data and try to give a better projection as far as how much we anticipate being saved and not spent out of the current year budget. In previous years, it's averaged around $700,000. I know it'll be higher this year, I just don't know by how much. One of the things that came up recently was what the city's unfunded debt is with CalPERS. This is shown in millions of dollars. I've got safety in one column, miscellaneous, and then the total. The CalPERS plan currently has, as of June 30th, 2014, because it's always a little bit behind, assets of $148 million, liabilities of $198 million, an unfunded liability of just under $50 million, and a percentage funded status of about 74.8% when you combine both plans. To that, we also have pension obligation bonds outstanding of $3.1 million. So our total unfunded pension debt is about $53 million.
Robin, just a point before you get the next slide here, but on that 53 million, that's actually down. I believe we were up around 57 million. Is that? It
is down. It was a reduction of about 3.7 million. I didn't bring my data with me, but it is a reduction. That's correct. And I think the reduction is mostly due to the increase in assets due to market value from the stock market improving. The city's water fund operating revenues are at 54% of budget. The seasonal nature of water billings to our customers, with consumption revenues being higher during the peak summer months, accounts for the increase over 50%. The capital connection fee revenues are only at 8% of budget. That's partially due to the fact that we budgeted for $1.6 million in connection fees related to the Prop 84 water line project. Those haven't been received yet this fiscal year. We anticipate that they will prior to the end of the fiscal year, and that will help increase that percentage. Operating expenditures are at 53% of the amount budgeted and are right on track with expectations. Our wastewater utility fund operating revenues are right at 50%, right where we'd expect them to be. Capital connection fee revenues are at 40% of budget. Expenditures are at 39%. I took a look at those to see why they're less than what we would anticipate halfway through the year. We have some vacancies within the department. In addition, major maintenance, biosolids, and chemical expenditures, which are encumbered but weren't spent as of December 31st. We anticipate that those will be spent prior to the end of the fiscal year. We have outstanding purchase orders, so I know that the funds are committed. Additionally, we have payment of solar expenses to PG&E that don't incur until May of each year. I like to show this calculation to council just so you're aware of how much we have cash available within our capital connection fee funds for both water and wastewater in relationship to the amount of debt requirement that we pay from those funds each year. We've been depleting our funds since development has slowed in the last 5 years or so. With our water fund, we have net resources of a bit available of just under $2.7 million. Annual debt service that we pay from those capital connection fees of about $1.5 million, which leaves us about $1.76. 1 year, 9 months worth of debt coverage available to pay our capital connection fee debt for water. Similar calculation for wastewater, and we have a little bit more, about 2.4 years worth of capital connection fee cash available, and that fluctuates regularly depending upon whether we've just paid debt service and how much we're taking in development connection fees. It's important to know, though, that as part of our bond covenants we have outstanding for making improvements to the city, both water and wastewater, our bond covenants indicate that City Council has agreed to raise rates if necessary in order to make debt service payments on the bonds if there's not sufficient capital connection fee monies to do so. So I would like to apprise council of where we're at fiscally with the cash available in connection fee accounts. Before I move on into what I'm anticipating and seeing for the beginning of fiscal year 15-16's budget preparation, does council have any questions on the 6 months that we've currently discussed for 14-15 fiscal year?
Any questions for Robin?
Not yet.
All right, go ahead and continue.
Well, like I said, we talked about fiscal year 14-15. I do want to let the public and the city's departments and employees know kind of where we're at. This is an update of the city's 5-year fiscal model on a go-forward basis. We shared this last year with everybody. I've gone through and updated it with our latest and greatest projections to try to manage expectations. We're still not in a position to add services or start adding things back to the city's budget. We're still in a very large deficit position, and until the pension obligation bonds are paid off, I anticipate that continuing. This is a historical slide that shows the city's revenues over time, going clear back to fiscal year 04 through fiscal year 14 on an actual basis, total revenues to the general fund, and then the fiscal year 15 amount is budgeted. Shows one-time sources such as sale of property and lease proceeds. It does not include the one-time cash reserves that we've pumped into the general fund to try to sustain our deficits during the recession and the downturn in the economy. Revenues peaked in fiscal year 08 at $37.2 million. Our budget amount is $34.9 million for fiscal year 15. I fully anticipate that we will come in higher than that because I know developer building permit fee revenues are coming in well. And as I indicated, property taxes are going to come in higher than we budgeted. But even with that said, we are still not back to our pre-recession levels. Expenses, on the other hand, we are back to our pre-recession levels. Expenses changed along with revenues, peaking in fiscal year 09. The amount budgeted for fiscal year 15 is increasing both due to contracted amendments to eliminate the furlough and increased healthcare and pension costs. Expenses peaked in fiscal year 08-09 and then were reduced during the recession, but now as we try to eliminate the furloughs and get back to more of a base level of services, our expenditures are going back up, so they're getting back to the pre-recession levels that we saw before. And these budget amendments include the contract amendments for mid-managers, first-level managers, confidential, POA, sergeants, and fire. The difference in the fiscal year 15 revenues of $34.9 million and expenses of $36.9 million is the $2 million deficit that we're looking at going into next fiscal year. I know we won't use all of our ESR, our Economic Stabilization Reserve, to the tune of $2 million because of vacant positions. We had savings last year. I anticipate we'll have savings again this year. I just don't know how much yet. This is a net of the operating revenues and operating expenditures, with the years in blue above the line being the years where we had surpluses. In fiscal year 05, the reason the surplus was so high is because we sold land. Fiscal year 09 forward, the red lines below the 0 point are the deficits that we've had. Fiscal year 14, we did have a surplus of about $600,000 due to the vacant positions. But I've shown fiscal year 15 budget as gray because we don't know what that's going to end up at by the time of the fiscal year ends. But right now it's at a $2 million deficit on a budget basis. And this is something I like to show people. One of our managers told me how useful and helpful he thought this slide was because it shows what the city would have expended had we not had the furloughs. The furloughs have saved us about $2.3 million at a 10% level. And it shows that we had, for fiscal year 10 and 11, we had a 5% furlough. And for fiscal year 12, 13, 14, and then I'm showing on into 15 at a 10% furlough, even though we've committed to reduce that furlough back to 5% as of March for some of the bargaining units. But it makes a significant difference, showing that for fiscal year 15, the deficit could be as high as $4.2 million. Last year, even with the surplus, it could have been as high as $1.6 million. So the furloughs have definitely saved the city a significant amount of money. This shows the 10-year changes in expense categories for the city, with PERS and overtime being the largest increases that we've incurred. They've grown most significantly. In recent years, overtime has been higher for police and fire, particularly last year because of vacant positions and the constant staffing model that we use for fire. In order to cover shifts, we pay overtime. So that has distorted to some degree the overtime percentage and increased it. The average increase in healthcare was only 5.1% over the 10-year period. You can see on the next slide, though, that the percentage was far less in the first half of the 10-year segment and significantly more in later years. The difference in the compounded growth rate of 2.6% for revenues compared to 3.8% for expenses may not seem like a lot, but over a 10-year period, it's significant. It represents a differential of 14.8% on a $35 million budget. That's just under $5.2 million. If our revenues had kept pace with our expenditures, we wouldn't talk about using our Economic Stabilization Reserve Fund to tide us over. We would be in a much better position than what we are right now fiscally. It's also noteworthy that material supplies and services have only gone up 0.3%, 1/3% over 10 years. We've really held the line on budgets where material supplies and services are concerned. Health expenditures, the red line represents the monthly cost for the city's share of healthcare, and then the blue lines are the percentage increases over time. And I wanted to show you this so you could see that in the early years, 3.4, 3.7, 6.5, not that large of increases. In more recent years, 11.6, 9.4, and 14%. Finance has historically used an 8% increase each year to project growth in healthcare. If this trend continues, 8% won't be enough. In the last 5 years, the average has been 9.5%. CalPERS' most recent actuarial reports show an increase over time in the projections that they expect the city to contribute. The blue line represents the safety rate as a percentage of payroll, and the green line is the miscellaneous as a percentage of payroll. The miscellaneous is provided to us exactly as a rate by CalPERS, and that's their projected rate. The safety, we've blended it with the variety of safety plans that the city has to come up with a composite rate. Projecting it to be 30.9% as of fiscal year 15, growing to 42.8%. This is only the employer portion. It doesn't include the portion that the city had been paying for employees. It also doesn't include 12.36% additional on top of that the city charges and collects through the payroll system to pay our pension obligation bonds. The city pays it, but we collect it through the payroll system, so we have it broke down by employee. So that's on top of this. So when you look at our costs going up, you can certainly see why, looking at all the graphs are on an upward trend where the expenditures are concerned. The good news is revenues are going up too. They're just not going up enough to generate new programs or add backs to the budget. So I wanted to make sure that everyone saw this with budget submissions coming soon. The total pension expenses that we're looking at are also on the rise at about $6.4 million anticipated in fiscal year 15, growing to $8.6 million in fiscal year 21. An increase of just under $2,175,000 or 33.6%. Pretty significant increases. And when everything's netted out between the growth in revenues that we expect, the budget balance is likely to remain in balance without, as an imbalance, I'm trying to say, not in balance with a deficit until the pension obligation bonds are paid off in fiscal year 16-17. And in 17-18, we start to climb out of the red and can look at the light at the end of the tunnel. Everything that finance puts together, we evaluate when we're preparing the budget. All of the negotiation scenarios that we've done with our employee bargaining units is all measured against, can our economic stabilization fund sustain us until fiscal year 17-18? Will our savings account get us by and cover our deficits? And I'm pleased to say that everything that we've done so far does. We set aside the ESR to tide us over during the downturn. And with the increases that we're seeing in employee benefit costs, our downturn has continued. The bottom line, employee benefit costs will continue to use up revenues. We have growth in revenues that they're being offset, though, by employee benefit costs, and that does not generate any new benefit to our employees in the form of take-home pay. It keeps the benefits sustainable. Our budget model continues to rely on the city's economic stabilization reserve over the next several years in order to sustain us during the downturn. With that, are there any questions?
Any questions of Robin? Robin, what is the current balance on the economic stabilization reserve, just roughly?
$4.3 million? 4.5 million? I'm going to say 4.5 million without looking.
All right, thank you. Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor, just to thank you for your patience, and thank you to Robin for taking you through that. I do realize it's a similar presentation that you saw a week ago at your workshop. Staff felt it important that this also be captured for the public as part of a videoed presentation. So should anyone ask about it, any one of you as a council or staff can refer them over to Robin's nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm happy to, if anyone in the public or staff has any questions, happy to sit down and go through it with them and answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Robin.
You're
Great job.
welcome.
All right.